Great, good afternoon. We have Martin Griffiths, who just briefed the council here to review. So Martin will have say a few words, and then take some questions.
Thank you very much. Does this work? Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this chance. I want to clarify some figures, because there's been quite a lot of debate about different statistics, which was a discussion inside the Security Council just now. With regard to the Black Sea Grain Initiative, the exports that have come across the Black Sea and gone to the rest of the world, 23% of the cargo exported, and as you know we're now around 9 million tons, have gone to lower or lower middle income countries. 23% of the cargo. 49% of the wheat exported, 49%, just under half, has gone to lower and lower middle income countries around the world. So it's important to disaggregate some of these overall figures to get a sense of the value of the initiative. But we're also reminded today by Rebecca Greenspan, my colleague, the Secretary General of UNCTAD, that grain prices shot up by 6% over the weekend in Chicago as a result of the news that we heard about the suspension of Russian participation in the Black Sea Grain Initiative. And that shows you, I think, as if we needed it, something of the value of the initiative. The second set of statistics, if I may, refers to the number of ships still there. We have outbound ships in the Bosphorus. Those are ships that have left the Ukraine ports and have gone to the Bosphorus where they await inspection. 86 ships are there in that, what I refer to as a maritime traffic jam, carrying nearly 2 million tons. 2 million tons, by the way, which is part of the 9 million, just for clarification. There are 12 ships in the Ukraine ports loaded, ready to come outbound. We have 5 ships in the Bosphorus inbound. They have already been inspected by all 4 parties before the recent suspension, and they are ready to move into the Ukraine ports and then back out. And I mention all this because we take the view, and this is what we have been doing today and will be doing tomorrow with our partners in Turkey, that there is the Black Sea Grain Initiative. The Russians have not withdrawn, as many people have said. The Russians have not terminated. The Russians have not pulled out of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. The words they've used very carefully is that they have suspended participation in that initiative for an indefinite period. And as a result of that, we continue with this initiative, which remains extant, to move the ships outbound, where we are able, with Turkey, as a result of an agreement also with Ukraine, to inspect those outbound ships and to move that north of 2 million tons out to the world. So we will continue to inspect outbound ships. Remember, I say this because those are ships which have been inspected by all parties inbound, if you can follow the drift of this story. All parties inspected those ships going in before the suspension. We are inspecting the outbound ships coming out, Turkey and the UN, and moving those ships out to the world. And this is also partly because there is a significant concern about maritime safety and security as a result of those ships there. So that was my first point. I think it's hugely important to notice the distinction and not to obscure the distinction between a termination and a suspension. We are at the moment very actively engaged with Russian JCC members, the Joint Coordination Center members, who are still there, still in Istanbul, on the sort of issues that need to bring them back as soon as possible into full participation. I made reference in the Security Council to our views on the Russian claims that the attacks on Sevastopol would somehow, in some way, have breached the provisions of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. In our view, there is no substance to those claims. In any case, the Joint Coordination Center was set up precisely to deal with these kind of claims. And I remember being in Istanbul on the 23rd of July, the day after the signing of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, when there was an attack on Odessa, if you remember. And I remember saying publicly and privately, that's what we need the Joint Coordination Center for, and that's why we set it up so quickly. It's there to manage these sorts of disputes. And that's why we are, of course, disappointed that Russia has suspended its participation. We want them to come back to the JCC to have a full discussion about those claims, not to brush them aside. As I say, we have made our position clear, but this is a debate among the 4 signatories of that agreement. And there's huge debate on how many people benefit from this initiative. But if I may end with 1 or 2 comments on that. Number 1, as Rebecca has said, about 100 million people around the world, food insecure, are potentially and actually affected by the movement of grain and the movement of Russian grain and fertilizer out of Russia, subject to that second memorandum of understanding signed on the 22nd of July in Istanbul. Hugely important that Russian fertilizer gets to the world so that we don't find ourselves looking down the barrel of hunger after the next harvest. So we've got to get that out, we've got to get the grain initiative back in being, and we need to get the Russian goods, grain and fertilizer exported. And I would make one final point. It was always going to be a rough ride implementing an initiative which brings 2 warring parties together, 2 warring parties for whom this war is as tragic and difficult and savage as what any I have ever seen. It was always going to be difficult, and that's why the procedures and structures were elaborately negotiated between those parties to deal with inevitable crises. Let's get back to that process so that this very, very important indication of an agreement that can be found between warring parties will get back together again. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
James Bays, Al Jazeera. The Russian ambassador said that he couldn't guarantee the safety of vessels. He also said they may have to take their own measures. How worried are you about that? How will that affect potentially insurance for these vessels? And if I can also get your reaction on another thing that may affect this, the reports coming in the last couple of hours of a Russian attack on a grain barge in a place called Ochakiv, where apparently 2 people have been killed. I know it's not a place that's covered under the deal, but it's a Russian attack on a barge carrying grain, we believe.
Yeah, I don't know more than you know about that attack. But in answer to your first question, as I said earlier, we strongly hold the view, I'm a lawyer, that the Black Sea Grain Initiative remains in force. Never mind the suspension of participation of the Russians. Now, that Black Sea Grain Initiative obliges those who signed it not to attack ships or movements or relevant port facilities, if you remember. And we believe very strongly that that provision remains in force, including for the Russian Federation or any others who signed that. So what we do in line with these procedures, daily we circulate plans for what should happen the next day, whether it's inspections or ship movements. We did it yesterday towards the end of the day with regard to today. We'll do it later today with regard to tomorrow. That goes to all 4 parties. Now, James, you and I know quite familiar with the experience of humanitarian notification systems, including in Syria, including in Ukraine, which rely essentially on notifying relevant parties of a convoy moving or a ship moving in this case. It's not asking for the permission. In this case, there is an additional obligation of the parties not to attack. But we will then make a judgment at any time, Amir Abdullah, our coordinator, with Turkey as to whether a movement might be dangerous. But we are not asking for permission. We are continuing to implement the Black Sea Grain Initiative.
Specifically mentioned insurance.
Yeah, well, insurers will make their own decisions. and I've no doubt some of them are. And that is why, of course, the sooner we can get this full participation of Russia back to the table, the better. And, something I should have said earlier, we need it renewed. On the 18th of November, the 120 days, the first 120 days are up. It can be renewed without a vote. We'll just go through. We've been talking about that, including with yourselves recently. We need that assurance as well for the market, for insurers, for the Global South.
Michelle?
Thanks, Mr. Griffiths. Michelle Nichols from Reuters. Just following on from James's question, the insurers are already starting to stop coverage. What conversations are you having with them to try and convince them to keep that up? And just to your point about you were already in negotiations to try and extend this deal, do you see this as some kind of negotiating tactic by Russia? And what do they want to resume the deal?
I would absolutely not speculate on Russian motivation here, as you can imagine. No, there are two things. When we last met, just a few days ago, we talked about the renewal. That was the top item on our agenda, and by the way, in a way, it still is, because it's so important. I was in Moscow not long ago with Rebecca Greenspan. We talked to the authorities there about exactly that renewal, and were very encouraged by the discussions we had. And that's why we, the Secretary General, put out that statement about the absolute clear position of the United Nations on the need for renewal. Now, so we need that. This came as a bolt from the blue, and it is having that effect, as you say, on insurers. We are, through our people in the Joint Coordination Center, we talk to insurers pretty well every day. We have one of our International Maritime Organization colleagues, Pete Adams, who is a maritime expert, as well as knowing Lloyd's, of course, very well indeed. He talks to them a lot. We'll be saying to the insurers, what I just said to you is that we believe that the parties are still bound by their commitments. Insurers will make their own decisions. Let's get back to the table, all four parties.
Thank you. USG, it's Pamela Falk from CBS News. A similar question, but only about the suspension. Since the suspension was with regard to an attack, has the Russian Federation conveyed to you what they want? Is it an investigation? Is it a comment? How will they unsuspend even before the renewal comes up?
Well, we've had a bit of a discussion about that, I guess, in the Security Council just now, where the Russian Federation set out what they believe are the relevant facts, where those attacks did, in some ways, according to them, breach the provisions of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. I set out our view, which was a different one, which was that there were no prima facie breaches of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, that the corridor for vessels, protecting vessels, is not open at 4 a.m. It is open when ships move down the corridor. That's an agreement that we have made in detail with all the parties, including the Russian Federation. The attack took place at 4 a.m. on Saturday morning, as you know. And secondly, that indeed the ships that were apparently attacked, which I think were largely military vessels, there are no military vessels, to our knowledge, that are involved in the support to the Black Sea Grain Initiative. But these are counterclaims, right? That's why I keep saying this is what the Joint Coordination Center set up to do. Sit down, Russian Federation put forward their point of view, we'll do ours, Turkey will, and so will the Ukrainians. And then let's resolve it. As we have in the past, there have been occasions in the past, in these last 3 or 4 months, where there have been apparently alleged breaches of military drones coming close to the corridors, and one of the parties coming to the JCC to complain about it, and we dealt with it. I referred in there to the discovery of a floating sea mine about a week ago, where we were able, through the JCC, to take a consensual action as to discover what was actually going on. That's what the JCC is for. It's a dispute mechanism. No, they suspended their participation. We hope to see them back as soon as possible. That will be the first act, I think, once they're back is to have that discussion in the JCC.
Thank you so much. Veronika Melkozorova, New Voice of Ukraine, Ukrainian media. I want to ask you, so Russia has been talking about withdrawing from or suspending this initiative for a long time, basically. They are complaining about unfair treatment of the initiative, no fertilizers. Do you think that this attack that was basically 200 kilometers away from the corridors is being used as a pretext of not prolonging the initiative? And would it happen like anyway if there was no attack?
I'm not going to speculate about motivation for that attack. You must ask the Russian Federation. I'm one of those people, and I kept saying it publicly, and by the way, I think I'd still say it today, that I believe that the Black Sea Grain Initiative is going to be renewed. I believe in that, and we are going to make sure of it. We're going to do everything we can between now and the 18th of November to do so, and we will not let this get in our way. They have suspended, they haven't withdrawn. They have suspended, and they haven't terminated. And the difference is very, very simple. The difference is that as parties to that Black Sea Grain Initiative, they are still bound by it. That's why I've been explaining our continuing effort to move the outbound vessels. So I hope that what we see now, after this Security Council discussion, is then a return to business so that we can get back to exporting that grain and make it up to 10 million before we can successfully renew it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Does Russia agree with that? Thank you. What you just said, that the parties are bound by it? Does Russia, have they signalled their agreement to that?
What?
To